For this video, I'm going to be heading to Universal Studios Florida, as well as Islands of Adventure, to rate the best roller coasters from worst to first. Today I'm in the City Beautiful, otherwise known as Orlando, Florida, and I'm here to rate the best roller coasters ever built on Universal Studios property. Now, I feel like I need to get a few disclaimers out of the way first, so here goes. The first thing is, you're going to notice that one of the rides that I listed in my top 10 list no longer exists. Unfortunately, Universal did tear down one of the best roller coasters ever built here, and I'll go into detail once I get to that selection. Second thing is, you'll notice that some of my picks will probably trigger some people. Not all my opinions and views are within the mainstream. I am kind of notorious for trolling a little bit and thinking outside the box. One of the things that I did notice about the Florida parks for Universal Studios is Nintendo Land can't get here soon enough. They have beaten the dead horse that is Harry Potter to a pulp. Just totally overdone and overexposed, and there's just too much of it. I mean, one park is enough. Two parks is ridiculous. And to have the shuttle ride that runs between both parks, also themed to Harry Potter, you're out of your damn mind. This is just such an overexposed, milked franchise. Whatever. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's get to the top 10 roller coasters ever built at Universal Studios or Islands of Adventure. Number 89, Harry Potter and the Escape from Gringotts. So the difference between Disney and Universal is when Disney builds a crappy ride, for example, Rockit rides, they shut it down and throw it in the dumpster within a year or so. But Universal, being the masochists that they are, will torture generation after generation with lousy rides. And this is a great example of an ill-conceived idea. The depressing part is this isn't even the worst ride in the park. That would be Fast and Furious Supercharged. But this one is almost as bad. It's such a dumb idea. They decided to try to make a 3D movie that combines with a roller coaster. And because you're wearing 3D glasses, it's the slowest damn roller coaster ever built. It's such a pointless exercise. You know, the vehicle technology is similar to Revenge of the Mummy, and that older ride is vastly superior because it actually moves. This is the slowest, most pathetic roller coaster ever built. The Harry Potter theme isn't helping any because, let's face it, Harry Potter is just overexposed and just been exploited to death now, and there are other movie licenses. We can move on. This is not worth more than a 10-minute wait, and even that is being generous. I wouldn't even ride this thing if it was a walk-on at this point. It's such a terrible ride, ill-conceived, horrible, lousy as a roller coaster, lousy as a Harry Potter experience. Just a skip, a major skip. Number 69, Flight of the Hippogriff. Another thing that Universal Studios is notorious for is completely cloning the rides. I guess Vekoma was having a sale because this Flight of the Hippogriff and the Woodpecker Nuthouse coaster are identical rides in these side-by-side theme parks. Universal is notorious for this. For example, the Spider-Man ride and the Transformers ride are completely identical ride systems as well. Exactly the same track layout. The only difference is they changed the theming. And enough of this clone ride stuff. I mean, if you're going to spend millions of dollars, can you please give us different rides when the parks are literally next door to each other? And at least when you're riding the Nuthouse coaster, you don't have to stare at the Wicker penis for the entire ride. But when you're sitting in the front row of Flight of the Hippogriff, you get to stare at this Wicker penis for the whole ride. It's terrible theming. Harry Potter is so... Enough. Can you please stop phoning it in and take some pride in some of these rides? This is such a stupid theme for a kiddie coaster, and we already have the exact same ride at the next door park. Enough already, Universal. Can you please hire somebody that has some imagination and creativity instead of cloning the same damn thing twice.
Number 8. Woody Woodpecker's Nuthouse Coaster. Hey, look at this. We just rode this thing. It's pretty much the same as the Flight of the Hippo Stiffy at Islands of Adventure, only this one, they flipped the track and now we're going to the right instead of the left. But otherwise, these are identical Vekoma roller skaters. And at least I don't have to look at the wicker penis on this one, so that's a plus. You know, I have no idea what Universal is doing. Why they just repeat the same thing in both parks. There's just way too many clone rides in Islands of Adventure and Universal Studios. And it's embarrassing. You know, I realize, for example, Flight of Passage and Soarin' share similar technologies, but you'd never know it because they've done enough to differentiate those two between the two Disney parks. This is what happens when you don't do a good job differentiating the two parks.
Number 7, Pteranodon Flyers. This is a really unique ride. It's located in the Jurassic World, Jurassic Park section, whatever you want to call it, at Islands of Adventure. I didn't consider this a roller coaster, and I almost overlooked it in my ranking today. But when I was on Roller Coaster Database, I noticed that they qualify this as a roller coaster, so that's good enough for me. It's quite a unique ride. It's the only one in the world, to my knowledge. And the reason why I've only been on this a couple times is because there's a weight limit. And generally, they won't let you ride it unless you're accompanied by a small child. And since I'm a bachelor, that means I've only been on this ride probably 2 or 3 times when they didn't have that particular requirement to get on it. But it's a fun little ride, and it really is quite unique. It's like a hang glider ride more than a roller coaster in my opinion, and it's a lot of fun. And it almost reminds me of the old sky buckets from Magic Kingdom, where you're just kind of hanging from a track, although that was a cable car ride over at Magic Kingdom. But nonetheless, it's a fun little ride. I do love how it rocks on the turns, and if you can ride it, I would definitely recommend it. This particular one, just because it's such a unique experience. I considered ranking this higher, and I really, even now, I think it's better than the 7 would indicate. But there's some really good other roller coasters here at Universal that made this a pretty competitive field, so that's why it only made it up to 7. Number 6, Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure. I'm sure this pick will trigger some people. I know there are a lot of Harry Potter fans that get emotional about this ride, and they're probably going to get ticked that I picked it so low, and I get that. I realize it's going to come out, and I'm not here to bash this particular ride. I will acknowledge it's pretty good, but I am looking at it from a critical standpoint. I know how much this ride cost. This was a $300 million investment. I think it mostly went to the actors who were in the production here, because the ride itself, the theming, is a little underwhelming, to be honest. I mean, sure, they got these nice little walls and gardens and all this other stuff, but it's not very immersive to me. It still looks like it almost looks like a Six Flags roller coaster to me. I'm just not thrilled with it. When you go and ride a much older ride like Thunder Mountain, and it literally looks like a real mountain, and it's pretty immersive. You really feel like you're in a runaway mine train. This, I just don't feel like I'm in the Harry Potter world. When you're in the Diagon Alley area or the magical area of Islands of Adventure, that is pretty immersive. The cityscape looks a lot more convincing there. Here, it just doesn't do it for some reason. I don't know. It's definitely not them being cheap, because, like I said, supposedly they spent over $300 million building this thing. I don't see the money. I really don't. I mean, it's a pretty cool ride system. I love the vertical drop that kind of catches you off guard, and the backward launches and the forward launches are cool. And I believe this is has the world's most launches on any coaster. So that's all neat and everything, but at the end of the day, this is a pretty tame coaster. It's clearly made for families, and I know what used to stand on this ground, and to be honest with you, its predecessor was superior. I'm just going to say it. Dueling Dragons, or when it was later called Dragon Challenge, was a better ride. J.K. Rowling is an idiot. I'm just going to come out with her. I know she was the reason that they tore down Dueling Dragons, and she's a moron. I don't care how rich she is. Doesn't mean she doesn't do stupid things, and this is stupid because just honestly, I think it was a money grab because this is not as good as a coaster as what stood here before it. Number 5, Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit. Okay, quick disclaimer. Every one of these coasters now in my top 5 are must-ride experiences. I had difficulty picking the order of my preferences, and even now I'm kind of shuffling these around. But anything in my top 5, these are must-ride experiences. One of these coasters doesn't exist anymore, so that makes it easier. So all 4 of these rides that still are at the parks, you got to get on. I picked Hollywood Ride Rockit a little lower than some of the others because I have never found the restraint system and the Rockit to be very comfortable for me. I've always kind of banged my head on this particular ride, and that's the only reason I took off some points. But this is still an amazing ride. I love that you can personalize your soundtrack for this particular ride. It looks beautiful. It's probably the most visually impressive large coaster at the park. I mean, I love how it dips and dodges through the soundstage area at Universal Studios. The vertical lift is really interesting, and that first drop is stunning. Even now, I'm regretting placing that as my number 5 pick. But like I said, I only took the points off just because I find the ride vehicles themselves to be uncomfortable for somebody my build. I don't know if it's because I'm kind of skinny. I don't know if it's because I'm kind of short. I'm only 5'9", but I know the restraints don't feel good. I know I banged my head too much on this one, and that's the only reason it became my 5 pick. But otherwise, it's an amazing ride, and I will tough it out just because I love the ride overall. And you can see from the video, it is an amazing ride. So even though I find it to be a headbanger, I'd still recommend giving this one a try. Number 4, Revenge of the Mummy. This is kind of like Space Mountain at Magic Kingdom, only it's so much better. The visual effects on this ride are really good. There's fire effects and really good projection, and there's a reverse launch, and the theming is excellent. They got the original actors from the Mummy movies to make appearances, and it's just a really well executed ride. And this is when Universal Studios was really good at what they were doing. You know, if you've been following Universal Studios, the last several rides that they've added to the parks have been misfire after misfire after misfire. Whether you're talking about Fast and Furious or Skull Island or the latest Harry Potter rides, terrible compared to what they were doing 20 years ago. And that's the only downside to this ride, is it is getting kind of old, but thankfully they've been refurbishing it and updating a lot of the visual effects to keep it relevant. And this is a great ride. It's the best indoor coaster I've ever been on, bar none. It's better than anything else that I've ever seen. The fire effects alone, really, it's not something you expect on a roller coaster, but it's really good. Now, keep in mind the video footage you're watching right now, the lights are on, and this is presented like Space Mountain where the lights are turned off, so you wouldn't be able to see it normally. But when you watch the videos with the normal lighting, you can't see the track where you're going, so the video doesn't really help. But this one, it kind of gives away, I guess, the experience, because it's supposed to be thrilling because you're kind of rolling along on the roller coaster in the dark. But at the end of the day, I want you to see the actual ride and why this is such an amazing attraction, and definitely a must ride. Even if there's a 90-minute wait, you got to do this one. Number 3, Velocicoaster. So this is a brand new roller coaster ride built for 2021, and it is awesome. When Islands Adventure first opened, they were focused on the extreme thrill rides, building Dueling Dragons and the Hulk. They were definitely going after my heart because I love the extreme rides. You can tell they've kind of shifted towards the more family-friendly thrill rides, and if this is the future of the park, that is totally fine with me, because this is an amazing ride. When they were building this, there was a pandemic, and this really didn't get a lot of media coverage. It's almost like it had a media blackout. What I found when I was riding this was that it was underhyped and over-delivered versus something like Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure, which I feel like the local papers were writing about it every other week. And by the time I rode that, I was just completely like underwhelmed with the experience. It just, like I said, I feel like it was just not the right fit for this park. The other thing that I will say is, right now the lines are crazy for this thing. You're going to end up waiting in line 3 to 5 hours. Do I think it's worth a 5-hour wait? Probably not, but it's still really good. And one of the last things I'd like to point out about Velocicoaster is it's in a great location in the park. They built this coaster above like the lagoon in Islands Adventure, and just the way it dips and dodges around the water features is amazing. And the other thing that is cool about this is I'm glad they returned to Jurassic Park and Jurassic World, because thank God it's not another Harry Potter ride, because let's face it, that franchise is so overplayed now and tired. I feel like Jurassic Park is a better franchise for theme park attractions anyway, so this is a great ride. If you can ride it and the line's not too ridiculous, you really need to try this one out. Number 2, Dueling Dragons. It was also later known as Dragon Challenge. So I realize this pick is going to trigger some people, mostly because this coaster doesn't exist anymore. It was torn down to make room for Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure. Let's face it, I'm a roller coaster guy. This was the better of the 2 roller coasters. It's really not the fault of Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure. That's clearly being built for a family ride, and this was more of an extreme roller coaster ride. That was the mission of Islands Adventure back when it first opened in the 90s, and this was an opening attraction. They were trying to differentiate themselves from Disney. Disney World, even to this day, really doesn't have any adult coasters. It's mostly junior roller coasters. So they were trying to be the park for adults when they first opened. It was a racing coaster. There were 2 trains. There was Fire and Ice. Fire being the red side and Ice being the blue side. And they dueled originally. Later on, when it was renamed Dragon Challenge, they stopped dueling. I guess there were too many projectiles when the coasters were racing. You know, people with phones and sunglasses hidden the train they were racing, so that went away. And this was a pretty extreme coaster. I mean, each side had about 6 inversions, and the first drop was about 150 feet or so, and it was an amazing coaster. One of the biggest in Orlando when it debuted. It's kind of sad that they tore this down. Even now, I don't feel like anything they've got at the park matches the intensity of this thing. This thing was certainly the most intense ride in the park, and probably was responsible for its demise. It intimidated too many people, and I guess ridership was lower than it should have been, just because it was such an extreme ride that you really only got like the older teenagers and adults, the young adults too, because this was probably too intense for people probably over the age of 45 or so. So it was a very narrow demographic, so I understand why it got removed. It doesn't mean I have to be thrilled with it, because it was a huge loss as a coaster enthusiast. Number 1, the Hulk. In my opinion, the best roller coaster here at Islands Adventure and Universal Studios Florida. So the Hulk was one of the opening day attractions here at Islands Adventure when it first opened. Now, this isn't the original Hulk. About, I'd say 3 years ago now, this coaster was completely torn down and rebuilt from scratch. All new track, new cars, completely redesigned queue building. It was completely redone, and the new coaster is just as impressive as the old one. One of the things they did was they made the coaster a lot quieter. Apparently, a lot of the residents nearby, Universal Studios and Islands Adventure, are kind of in a suburban area around a lot of houses, and this coaster was notorious for having a roar, just like the real Hulk, and it was loud. And it wasn't even people screaming, it was literally the noise that this particular train created by going over the track. So they quieted this thing down, integrated a new audio system, and the new coaster is just as much fun. And the track layout is pretty much the same. You start out with that first launch, and then you go into the loop and into the lagoon and all kinds of stuff. So the layout is pretty much the same as the old one. They just they quieted it down, and I do feel like the new coaster seems a little smoother riding too, although the original Hulk was pretty good in that regard too. Overall, this is a must ride, the best coaster here at both parks, and you owe it to yourself to go on a ride. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe.